Imagine a pope who ruled the Catholic Church, commanded armies, crowned kings, yet openly kept a mistress and fathered children within the Vatican walls. This wasn't whispered scandal, it was daily reality. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, defied the very vows he was meant to uphold. His mistress, Vanozza Cattanei, wasn't just a fleeting secret. She became a power broker, her children raised to dominate Renaissance politics. For centuries, the Vatican has preached celibacy and sacrifice. But under Alexander, it looked more like a royal court, filled with ambition, rivalry, and forbidden love. History remembers popes as holy figures, but this one ruled like a king with a queen at his side. Power wore a mask, but desire held the strings. In this video, you'll step inside the shadowed halls of Renaissance Rome, where love and corruption walked hand in hand. We'll unravel how Vanozza Cattanei, mistress to Pope Alexander VI, turned private passion into public influence. You'll discover the children she bore who became infamous figures of history. Cesare, the ruthless general who inspired Machiavelli, and Lucrezia, long accused of poisoning her way through dynastic marriages. And you'll see how one woman quietly shaped the politics of Europe, while the world condemned her from the pulpit. By the end, you'll realize the Vatican wasn't just the center of faith, it was a battlefield of family ambition. Here's my question for you. If you were Vanozza, loved by the most powerful man in the world, yet despised by the church, would you embrace the shadows and protect your family quietly, or step into the light and risk eternal infamy? Imagine the choice: secrecy or legacy. Which would you choose? What happens when the holiest office on earth starts to look like a royal court? Renaissance Rome was already a city steeped in corruption, where cardinals bought votes, priests sold indulgences, and wealth carried more weight than piety. When Rodrigo Borgia ascended as Pope Alexander VI in 1492, the church's facade of sanctity cracked wide open. Unlike past pontiffs who at least pretended to hide their affairs, Alexander was bold. He acknowledged his mistress Vanozza Cattanei and openly elevated their children, placing them into positions of wealth and power. Rome's whispers became shouts. The Pope had turned the Vatican into a dynastic palace. For ordinary believers, it was a crisis of faith. For rival families, it was a declaration of war. Yet within that scandal, Vanozza found her path to influence, one that would rival queens and duchesses of her age. Every power story begins with an unlikely figure. Vanozza Cattanei wasn't born into nobility or clerical privilege. She was the daughter of a modest Roman family, known more for charm than for titles. In a city where survival often depended on who you knew, Vanozza's wit and beauty carried her into influential circles. When she met Rodrigo Borgia, then a rising cardinal, she became far more than a companion. She became indispensable. Unlike fleeting affairs common in papal Rome, their bond endured for decades. She bore him 4 children, managed properties, and carefully built her own independent fortune. Behind her quiet exterior was a woman who understood the game of survival in Renaissance politics. She didn't wear a crown, but she mastered the art of leverage. From modest beginnings, she became the woman who would reshape the papal court itself. Ambition often hides behind devotion. Rodrigo Borgia arrived in Rome as a young Spaniard with little more than family connections and relentless drive. But the Vatican of the 15th century was less about holiness and more about politics. Bribes, alliances, and promises fueled every conclave, and Rodrigo mastered the art of persuasion. By 1492, his campaign to secure the papacy was legendary. Gold flowed into the pockets of cardinals, and deals were struck in backrooms thick with smoke. His election as Pope Alexander VI was no accident. It was the result of calculated ambition. For Rome, it meant the church would now operate like a powerful dynasty, and for Vanozza Cattanei, it meant her life would be tied forever to the papal throne. She was no longer just a mistress, she was the silent partner of the world's most powerful man. Behind every closed door of Renaissance Rome, alliances were sealed not just in treaties but in beds. The papacy was expected to represent celibacy and divine authority, yet Pope Alexander VI shattered that illusion. His relationship with Vanozza Cattanei wasn't hidden. Their children were raised openly, and his affection for her was clear. To many, it was scandalous. To Alexander, it was strategy. Through Vanozza, he built a stable household, one that could rival the ruling families of Italy. But these personal choices carried public consequences. Rivals seized on the hypocrisy, fueling gossip that spread faster than sermons. Priests preached virtue on Sunday, then whispered about the Pope's mistress by Monday. Still, the Vatican tolerated it, because Alexander's grip on power was absolute. And through it all, Vanozza learned how influence was cultivated not in confessionals, but in intimacy. Imagine hearing the words, "These are the Pope's children." It was unthinkable, yet Rome knew the names: Cesare, Juan, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey. Born of Vanozza Cattanei, they were raised not in secrecy, but with pride. Pope Alexander VI didn't just acknowledge them, he positioned them like chess pieces across Europe. Juan was made Duke of Gandia. Cesare became a cardinal before shedding his robes for armour. Lucrezia was married into alliances that stitched together political power, and Geoffrey was wed into Neapolitan nobility. For rival dynasties, this was more than scandal, it was threat. A pope wasn't supposed to have heirs, let alone turn them into weapons of influence. But Alexander saw no contradiction. For him, fatherhood and papacy went hand in hand. And for Vanozza, each child's rise expanded her reach, binding her legacy to the very structure of Renaissance politics. Step inside the Vatican during Alexander VI's reign, and it looked less like a holy seat and more like a royal palace. Cardinals walked its halls, yes, but so did noble suitors courting Lucrezia, diplomats negotiating Cesare's advancement, and merchants carrying tributes for the Pope's favour. At the centre of this storm sat Vanozza's children, treated as legitimate heirs in all but name. With Alexander's blessing, they married into ruling dynasties, inherited titles, and commanded troops. The Vatican became a family court where sacred relics sat alongside wedding contracts. For centuries, the Church claimed separation from worldly ties. Under Alexander, those lines blurred until they vanished. The Vatican's sacred aura masked its true role, a dynastic hub designed to secure Borgia power across Italy. And behind the curtains, Vanozza's steady hand helped keep those alliances intact. Every dynasty needs a daughter who can bind alliances, and for the Borgias, that was Lucrezia. From a young age, she was married off as a tool of politics, first to Giovanni Sforza of Milan, then to Alfonso of Aragon, and later to Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara. Each match was carefully chosen, not for love but for power. Yet history painted her with a darker brush, accusing her of poisonings, incest and betrayal. Was she a schemer or simply a pawn in her father's and mother's game? The truth lies somewhere in between. Raised under Vanozza's influence, Lucrezia learned survival in a world where women were often discarded. She managed her own courts, acted as regent in Ferrara, and became respected as more than a bargaining chip. For the Borgias, she was both scandal and strength. For Vanozza, she was proof that a daughter could wield power, not just secure it. If Lucrezia was the pawn, Cesare was the sword. Groomed from birth to embody ambition, he was first forced into the robes of a cardinal. But Cesare was never meant for the church. He craved power measured in steel, not scripture. Casting off his red hat, he became a military commander feared across Italy. His campaigns carved new borders, his merciless tactics reshaped politics, and his name burned itself into the memory of Renaissance warfare. Machiavelli himself would later write The Prince Inspired by Cesare, a man who embodied both brilliance and brutality. And behind him stood his parents, Alexander granting authority, Vanozza nurturing his rise. Together, they unleashed a figure who terrified rivals and fascinated historians. Cesare didn't just play the game of power, he rewrote the rules no matter the cost. Every dynasty runs on coin, and the Borgias mastered the art of turning faith into fortune. Under Alexander VI, indulgences, the selling of forgiveness, became a booming business. Simony, or the buying of church offices, was practiced openly, filling Vatican coffers while draining the faithful. But Vanozza wasn't just watching, she was building. Through taverns, rental properties, and clever dealings, she amassed her own independent wealth. This wasn't a woman content with papal gifts. She reinvested, multiplied, and secured financial independence that few mistresses ever achieved. Money was power, and Vanozza ensured that her children were never vulnerable to papal whim alone. When critics accused the Borgias of bleeding Christendom dry, they weren't wrong, but the gold lined not just the Pope's treasury, but also the pockets of his mistress. Power never goes unchallenged, and the Borgias drew enemies like moths to flame. Italian noble houses such as the Orsini and the Colonna viewed them as upstart foreigners, Spaniards corrupting the Roman seat. Rival cardinals plotted in whispers, ready to strike if Alexander faltered. Outside Rome, kings of France and Spain used alliances with or against the Borgias to tilt the balance of Italy. And yet, within this storm, Vanozza played her part carefully, shielding her children, brokering relationships, and acting as the quiet counterweight to Alexander's arrogance. Rome thrived on rumour, and each rival spread darker tales. Poison rings, secret murders, forbidden feasts. Truth blurred with myth until the Borgias became the embodiment of scandal itself. Yet even scandal couldn't erase their power. In politics, perception kills as quickly as poison. Mistresses in papal Rome were supposed to fade into the background, but Vanozza Cattanei refused to play that role. As Alexander VI's partner, she quietly built networks that rivaled any noblewoman in Rome. She owned taverns that became meeting grounds for merchants, diplomats, and courtiers. Her establishments doubled as hubs of information. When her children needed support, she had resources ready. When enemies circled, she had allies waiting. Unlike many women of her time, Vanozza wasn't a shadow, she was a strategist. While Alexander wielded papal authority, she provided stability, finances, and counsel. Together they created a dynastic machine that functioned both publicly and privately. For the Vatican, it was unprecedented. For Vanozza, it was survival turned into influence. She proved that power wasn't only taken, it could be quietly cultivated. If you're fascinated by how a pope's mistress could outmaneuver kings and cardinals, make sure to subscribe. The Borgia story doesn't end here. What comes next is even darker, wilder, and more unbelievable than the rumors you've already heard. Don't miss the next descent into history's untold chapters. Imagine Vatican halls lit by torchlight, not for prayer, but for feasts of excess. Eyewitnesses describe the infamous Banquet of the Chestnuts, where courtesans and nobles mingled in a spectacle that blurred lines between rumour and reality. Whether exaggerated or true, these stories fed Rome's hunger for scandal. The Pope's court was painted as a place of debauchery, where sacred robes brushed against velvet masks. For Alexander's critics, it was the ultimate proof of corruption. For Vanozza, it was dangerous. Each story risked staining her children's prospects. Yet, scandal had a strange power. It intimidated rivals, cemented the Borgias' legend, and carved their place in history. Even centuries later, historians debate fact from fabrication. But in Renaissance Rome, perception mattered more than truth. and the Borgias ensured both were unforgettable. Few names in history are as twisted by rumour as Lucrezia Borgia. To her enemies, she was a poisoner, a seductress, even a conspirator in her father's and brother's crimes. Yet strip away the gossip, and a different picture emerges. Married off 3 times for political gain, she endured humiliation, betrayal, and constant reinvention. Letters reveal her as intelligent, compassionate, and deeply loyal to her family. As Duchess of Ferrara, she proved herself a capable ruler, managing estates and earning respect from her subjects. The poison tales? Likely slander spread by rivals, but in Renaissance Rome, women didn't control their reputations, men did. Vanozza, as her mother, would have known this reality all too well. For both women, survival meant living with lies louder than truth. History may have painted Lucrezia as villain, but her endurance tells another story. While Lucrezia fought rumour, Cesare carved his reputation in blood. After abandoning the church, he became a warrior prince feared across Italy. His campaigns brought cities under Borgia control with ruthless efficiency, and his cruelty earned him both terror and respect. But Cesare wasn't only feared, he was studied. Niccolo Machiavelli observed him closely, later using Cesare as the model for The Prince, the ultimate handbook of political power. Imagine inspiring the manual on manipulation itself. That was Cesare's legacy. Yet behind the steel and strategy stood Vanozza, the mother who raised him. She had given the world not just a son, but a symbol of ambition without mercy. Cesare embodied the dangerous blend of charm and brutality that defined the Borgias, and like a shadow over Europe, his influence lingered long after his armies fell. Most mistresses faded once a pope's attention shifted. Vanozza Cattanei did the opposite. She built an empire. Beyond her role in the Vatican, she invested in inns, taverns, and rental properties across Rome. Her establishments weren't just sources of income, they were centres of influence, where merchants, diplomats, and soldiers crossed paths. By securing land and wealth in her own name, she carved independence rare for a woman in her time. Even after Alexander's death, her fortune ensured security when enemies turned on the Borgias. Vanozza had seen enough of Rome's treachery to know money was armour, and she wore it well. Her businesses shielded her family and guaranteed her voice in the city's affairs. While others dismissed her as merely the Pope's mistress, she quietly became a financial powerhouse. No dynasty rises without enemies sharpening their knives. The Borgias faced conspiracies from every side. Noble families plotted in palaces, rival cardinals schemed within the curia, and assassins lurked in the streets. Poison was a weapon of choice in Renaissance Rome, and rumours swirled of meals gone deadly. Alexander himself survived attempts, but not all his allies were so fortunate. For Vanozza, danger was constant. She knew that one wrong move could erase her children's future. Yet she endured, protecting her family while navigating treachery that could topple them overnight. When rivals tried to smear her with accusations of corruption, she leaned on her businesses and allies to survive. Enemies struck, but she remained. Survival in Rome wasn't about innocence, it was about resilience. Power never lasts forever, not even for popes. When Alexander VI died suddenly in 1503, rumoured by some to be poison, though likely disease, the Borgia Empire collapsed almost overnight. Without his authority, Cesare's armies fractured, their enemies pounced, and alliances dissolved. Families that once bowed in fear now rose in vengeance. Rome, quick to turn, painted the Borgias as monsters to erase their influence. The Vatican, eager to restore its image, distanced itself from the scandal. For Vanozza, the loss was devastating. The man who had elevated her was gone, and her children faced the fury of rivals who had waited years to strike. What had been a dynasty at the peak of power became a house of cards collapsing in public view. Yet, in the chaos, one figure endured: Vanozza Cattanei. Unlike Alexander or Cesare, she avoided a bloody downfall. Her careful investments and measured presence spared her from complete ruin. She withdrew from the storm, retreating into her properties and maintaining her wealth long after the Borgias' power was broken. Vanozza lived to old age, nearly 76, a remarkable feat in Renaissance Rome, and died respected, even honoured. She funded churches, supported charitable works, and secured a place for her memory beyond scandal. Where her lover was condemned and her children immortalized in infamy, she achieved something rare: quiet survival. In the end, the mistress who once ruled the Vatican halls outlived the empire she helped build. Walk through Rome today, and echoes of Vanozza Cattanei still linger. She founded and restored churches, funded convents, and left behind properties that shaped the city's streetscape for centuries. At Santa Maria del Popolo, a church tied to the Borgia family, her name endures as a benefactor. For a woman once scorned as a scandal, her legacy was surprisingly pious. It was Vanozza's way of rewriting the script, transforming wealth born of controversy into works that would survive judgment. Unlike her children, remembered in whispers of poison and war, she carved a quieter, steadier memory. Rome honours builders more than destroyers, and Vanozza secured her place as one who left behind more than gossip. In death, she found a reputation her enemies couldn't erase. The story of Vanozza Cattanei and Pope Alexander VI is both warning and revelation. Their love created a dynasty, yet it also invited scandal that would echo for centuries. They proved that private passion could shape public politics, but also that mixing the two leaves legacies tainted. For Vanozza, it was survival turned into influence. For Alexander, it was ambition masked as holiness. Together they remind us that power is never simple. It lifts and destroys ours in equal measure. And though their names are forever shadowed by controversy, their story offers a timeless truth. Greatness always carries risk, and every empire is fragile. In the end, the Vatican wasn't ruled by faith alone. It was ruled by human desire. History often reduces Vanozza Cattanei to a footnote, the Pope's mistress. But look closer and you'll see a woman who navigated a world designed to erase her. She raised children who altered European politics, built a financial empire in her own right, and left behind a legacy still visible in Rome's stones. While Alexander VI claimed the papal throne, it was Vanozza who gave his reign continuity, keeping the family's ambitions alive beyond the walls of the Vatican. Without her, the Borgia story would lack its foundation. She was not just a companion, but an architect, a reminder that history is often shaped by those the chronicles try to silence. The Vatican scandal of the Borgias may seem distant, but its lessons echo loudly. Even now, leaders' private lives spill into public power. Romantic entanglements, hidden families, and secret finances continue to shape decisions that affect nations. Vanozza's story reminds us that influence doesn't always wear a crown or sit on a throne. It can whisper from the margins and steer the course of history. Power is human and therefore flawed. The Borgias remind us that ambition, desire, and survival are forces that never vanish. And the question remains, are we any less vulnerable to them today than Renaissance Rome was centuries ago?